Colombia. Y bueno, logré hacerle una pregunta en el público, logré que me firmara mis libros, todavía tengo por aquí mis libros firmados. Ahora les puedo mostrar un poco de estas firmas que tengo de cuando estuve en Cartagena viendo a Chimamanda. Entonces estoy muy emocionada de verdad de estar acá. Para mí es muy importante y muy significativo presentarles a Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, un ícono de la literatura, no solamente un ícono feminista, un ícono de la literatura africana y de la literatura mundial, diríamos hoy. Chimamanda ha publicado las novelas Americana, La Flor Púrpura, Medio Sol Amarillo. También publicó el libro de cuentos Algo alrededor de tu cuello, la carta muy reconocida, querida IGUAL, Cómo educar en el feminismo, y los ensayos El peligro de la historia única, Todos deberíamos ser feministas, y muy recientemente en español Sobre el duelo. Bienvenida, Chimamanda.
Thank you.
Muy bien. Para mí es inevitable hacer esta conversación y hacer estas preguntas sin recordar que estoy aquí como una mujer negra, como una mujer afro-latinoamericana, y que además estoy en un departamento donde el 82% de la población es afro. Cuando leí Americana, hace 6 años leí Americana, me sentí completamente representada. Yo sentía que Ifemelu era yo y que sus preguntas eran las mías, y sentía que esa historia de una jovencita que se fue a estudiar a otro lugar era la historia de todas nosotras aquí en el departamento del Chocó, y sentí que teníamos un pasado en común, la proveniencia de África, pertenecer a una diáspora, preguntas sobre nuestro cabello, sobre nuestra piel. Por eso quiero empezar hablando sobre la representación en la literatura. ¿Por qué es necesario vernos representados en la literatura? ¿Para qué sirve esto?
So, why is it important to see ourselves represented in literature? Well, it's interesting to me because I think this is a question we would not even ask if we didn't live in a world with power differences. Because the fact that there are groups of people who are not fully represented in literature is a result of power. It's about power. Because I think power is about whose story gets told, who does the telling. When I was growing up, and I grew up in a small university town in Nigeria, and most of the books I read were books written by English authors or American authors, and the characters were all white. And for some time, I did not realize that it was okay to write about people like me, because I did not see people like me in literature. And for a child who was just completely in love with books and reading, it affected the way that I thought of myself and my own world. And I was fortunate that it changed after a short while. Had I not seen people like me in literature, I think it's fair to say that I would have grown up not having a full sense of self-confidence and self-esteem. Because if your story is not worthy of literature, then in some ways it means that your story is not worthy at all. And I think it's important to see a diverse range of people in literature. And it's not just for us, people of color or Black people or women, it's for everyone. Because, I think that if you're a white male, and we now live in a world where white male kind of represents the apex of power, you still need to read literature that has Black people in it and Asian people in it and all kinds of people in it, because that's the way the world is. And I think that literature should show us the world as it is, because otherwise we will not be able to understand what it means to live in a world like ours if our literature doesn't represent the people who live in that world. So I think it's important for me personally to see Black people, Black women. I have to say that when I started reading books by African authors, it was mostly men. And then I remember when I read Flora Wampa, who is actually one of the pioneers of sort of West African women writers in English. And it meant so much to me to see the stories of women, of Igbo women. And they were very familiar, but also kind of exotic. And it gave me a kind of confidence to tell my own stories. So I really think it's very important.
Thank you, Chimamanda. It's very important for me, this moment, and your words. I don't speak in English. It's very difficult for me, but it's very important that you accept this interview in Spanish. Yes, thank you. Bien. Usted ha mencionado en distintos espacios que se dio cuenta en Estados Unidos que era negra. Eso es algo que nos pasa a nosotros frecuentemente, como este departamento es mayoritariamente negro, como ya lo decía, siempre que salimos es que nos hacemos conscientes de eso. Y luego sentimos que estamos en una encrucijada en la que nos toca estarnos definiendo todo el tiempo. ¿Cómo te defines como mujer? ¿Cómo te defines como persona negra? ¿Cómo te defines como africano? ¿Cómo te defines como persona colombiana? Todo el tiempo nos exigen construir de identidad, persona colombiana. Todo el tiempo nos exigen construir una especie de identidad alrededor de eso que se supone que somos. ¿Usted piensa que esta obligación de estarnos definiendo es algo transitorio mientras construimos o conquistamos la igualdad, o vamos a necesitar hacerlo para siempre?
Actually, I think it's a very interesting question because do I think it's a transitory burden? I think yes and no. And I say that because when I talk about things like feminism, I like to say that the end point of feminism is to make feminism no longer necessary. And that if we get to a point where men and women are equal, then we will no longer need feminism. So the end point of feminism is to make itself redundant. And also the end point of anti-racism is for us to get to a point where we no longer need to talk about anti-racism. But it's going to take a long time to get there. And I feel as though, because of the nature of human beings, I think that every walk of justice is never quite finished. I think that justice is an unending movement, that we cannot say we've achieved this, so now let's sit back and relax. Because I think that the thing about achieving equality or any kind of justice is that you always risk losing it again. So I think the struggle or the movement for justice will never end. But this idea of what identity means is something that I think can shift. So I, for example, if I get to the US and suddenly I'm Black, and it's not that I don't know that this is, of course I know the color of my skin and I like the color of my skin and I don't want to change it for anything. But it's that when I got to the US, I realized that this meant something in America that it did not mean in Nigeria. And that what it meant in America was just a lot of negative stereotypes. And so for me, it was trying to make peace with this new identity, that when you're Black, when you're Black and you do well in school, it's considered remarkable in the US. But in Nigeria, it was normal. And so I think the meaning attached to identity is as important as the identity itself. So I'm very happily Black. I don't want to be anything else. But for me, the question is, what are the meanings that we attach to Blackness? And those are the things that we can change. And I think with time and with greater access for Black people across the world, maybe the meanings that the world attaches to Blackness will start to change. But there's a lot of work to be done. And I was just reading an article about the Black football players who have been abused racially online. And this is happening in the UK. And these are players who play for the UK, who are British, but somehow their Blackness sets them aside. And they're now being racially abused for their Blackness. And it's because that is a society that attaches negative meaning to Blackness. And I think that's what we need to start changing. So for me, it's not about changing the identity. It's about changing the meanings that we attach to it. Because I'm very happily Black and I want to remain Black. but I also want to decide what Black means for people.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias, Chimamanda, de verdad, por todas estas palabras. Vamos a hablar ahorita un poquito de guerra y de conflicto. Nosotros en Colombia estamos en un momento en el que se supone que estamos en la implementación de un proceso de paz después de una guerra de 50 años con un grupo subversivo. Esta implementación ha sido difícil realmente, pero bueno, ahí vamos lentamente pasando la página. En Medio Sol Amarillo, usted hace un trabajo impecable, una novela que además les recomiendo, fue llevada al cine por el director Velia Vidal, muy interesante la película, me gustó mucho también. El asunto es que en esta novela nos adentramos en las profundidades sociales y humanas de la guerra de Biafra en Nigeria. Y yo quisiera preguntarle, ¿qué rol siente usted que juega la literatura en términos personales y sociales en ese proceso de reconocer y de narrar una guerra? Y quisiera saber también un poco sobre el efecto que tuvo en usted escribir sobre un conflicto, pues que no vivió, digamos, en su piel, pero está íntimamente ligado con su historia y con su familia.
So two things. I think literature and storytelling is such an important part of how we make sense of very traumatic experiences. So when I made the decision to write about the Nigerian-Biafran War, which ended in 1970, but which is still very present in Nigeria today. So 1970 wasn't that long ago. And I remember people telling me not to write about it because it meant I was looking for trouble. It was better to leave things alone. But I did not want to leave things alone because my family had experienced this war. I knew how much it had affected my family. And for myself, I wanted to make sense of it. I wanted to understand this war that had, taken my grandfathers. Both my grandfathers died in refugee camps in that war, but also had changed my parents. I think one of the ways that I like to put it is that war robbed my parents of their innocence. It changed them, it changed their lives materially, but also it changed them emotionally and mentally. And I wanted to understand it. But I also wanted to make it a story of human beings. I'm very much interested in how the big political events affect human lives. How does a woman go from feeding her children milk and sandwiches to suddenly considering feeding them roasted lizards? Right? How do you go from having a life that is safe to having to run from town to town and hide in bunkers? What does it do to your relationship with the people you love? Those are the things that I was interested in. But I also hope that the novel would be a way for my generation to start to talk about that period. I think when you're having a conversation that is very obviously political about something like that, it can be quite difficult. People get very defensive. People go to their sides of the story and they hold on to their sides. But when you're talking about it in terms of literature and a novel, it's easier to talk about. Because you politics is no longer center stage. Now you're talking about love and you're talking about, why did that character make that decision to go to Kano and I can't believe what she experienced there. And, I think that literature gives us an opportunity to talk about difficult political subjects because we are then talking about them in terms of the human story. There's a scene in Half of the Yellow Sun where that's set in an airport in northern Nigeria, and it's about Nigerian soldiers who went into the airport and just shot people, killed them. And it's the kind of thing that to bring up in Nigeria today would be very politically controversial because there are people who do not even know that happened and people who do not want to talk about it. But now in the novel, there's a character who was at the airport when that happens. And it becomes, I think, an easier way to talk about that subject. And it happened, it's a real part of our history. And I feel as though we need to engage with it. So for me, more personally, I wanted to, it's also my history. I didn't experience it, but I was born 7 years after the war ended. And as a child, sometimes we would be playing outside and we would pick up sort of old bullet casings from the war. So we knew a war had happened. My mother would often talk about how she lost everything in the war. And I kind of just really wanted to understand it for myself. So it was two things, wanting to write a narrative for my generation of Nigerians, but also much more personally, trying to understand what took my grandfathers and what changed my parents.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, definitivamente sí sabemos que usted escribe sobre temas difíciles, ¿no? Y esto lo vemos en La Flor Púrpura también. Para mí es una novela impactante, muy difícil de leer, es fuerte, es una novela que duele realmente. Y algo que me llamó mucho la atención, aparte de reafirmar mi amor por los sanjoaquines o los hibiscos, ¿no? Que acá los llamamos sanjoaquines o papos, fue el cuestionamiento a la ruptura cultural, ¿sí? Como esa especie de contradicción entre crecer, avanzar, educarse, pero lo que eso significaba, digamos, en una colonia, romper también con prácticas culturales tradicionales. Recientemente, en el estallido social que vivimos en Colombia, una de las acciones más representativas ha sido el derrumbamiento de las estatuas de colonizadores españoles o de otros personajes que para los pueblos indígenas o para los pueblos afro no representan pues nuestra cultura, nuestra identidad, ¿cierto? Es como si se intentara escribir una nueva historia, construir nuevos símbolos. ¿Usted cree que los países y los pueblos que han sido oprimidos necesitamos reconfigurar nuestros símbolos como una forma de reivindicación ante el colonialismo o la opresión?
Yes, I think symbols are very important for societies, right? And but at the same time, I think this is also a really interesting question and something that I think about a lot, because on the one hand, I don't want us to deny history. I think it's important to acknowledge the things that happened. And so when people want to take down statues, I understand that, because a statue is a symbol that is there to be admired. So what we're saying is that as a society, we approve of and we admire what that statue represents. And in that case, I think taking down statues of symbols that represent oppression, slavery, colonialism, we should take them down, but we should put them in a museum. We should never forget what happened. And I think in talking about oppression, we cannot only talk about the oppressed, we must talk about the oppressors. Because I think that sometimes in talking about these things, we forget that oppression did not fall down from the sky. Somebody did it. We need to remember the oppressors. I also think, though, that there's so many stories that haven't been told because of power. So many stories, for example, of slave rebellions that haven't been told. Even colonialism. I think the story of colonialism that we have is still from the point of view of the colonizers, not the colonized. And I think those are things that we really need to start to change. And so the statues that I think any society that is diverse and honest, they need to have statues that represent the things that society values. So we cannot have statues celebrating slavery, for example. I just don't think it makes sense, especially since we're supposed to be at a point where we all collectively agree that slavery was a terrible thing. And so in general, I support this idea that we need to rethink the symbols that we celebrate as a society. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we do it in a way that we're careful not to then kind of hide away from our past or pretend that certain things did not happen, because they happened, right? And I just think that the story of the oppressor matters. We need to know what was done. We need to know who did it. We need to know when it was done. We need to know what the what the legacy is today, not just for the oppressed, but for the oppressors. I think, for example, in the US, that when we talk about people who were enslaved and their descendants, who I believe are still living with the effects of slavery today, I also think that the descendants of the slave owners are still living with the benefits of being slave owners. And I think we need to talk about that as well. It's a conversation that I think is complex and not very simple.
Ok. He visto su Instagram, por supuesto, la sigo en Instagram, ya he dicho en repetidas ocasiones que soy una fan completa, y también sigo algunas cosas de la cultura nigeriana, por supuesto, porque sentimos un vínculo directo con África. ¿Usted cree que la moda, lo que usted hace en su Instagram, o Nollywood, por ejemplo, que es la naciente, creciente, además poderosa industria cinematográfica de Nigeria, son una forma de revolución cultural?
Yes, I do. I think confidence is a form of cultural revolution. When you start to kind of own what is yours. So my decision to start wearing Nigerian brands was really kind of my way of saying, Nigeria is worthy. There's so much talent in this country, and I want to represent the wonderful work that's coming from talented Nigerian designers. I think that culture, the production of culture, is very often an act of revolution. It's an act of taking back your own story, taking back your own self in some ways. So Nollywood, you mentioned Nollywood, and Nollywood is an industry I really admire. I might not like many of the films because they're not really my taste, but I am so happy that Nollywood exists, because Nollywood for me is a sign of a certain kind of cultural confidence. This is ours. We're making it, we're exporting it, we're consuming it. There's something about it that I really find very inspiring.
Bueno, justamente hablando de moda, vemos que usted tiene una camiseta hermosa. También leí un poco sobre el duelo, que no le gustan mucho las camisetas, pero en ese proceso estuvo diseñando algunas. Y esta que tenemos aquí dice que sentirse seguro de sí mismo es una revolución, ¿no? La revolución de la moda y la revolución del mensaje también.
Yeah, my t-shirt. So my t-shirt says, can you see it? It says Onwa Grace, and it means child of grace. So it means I'm honoring my mother, and I designed it myself. And yeah, my mother died in March, and so this is one of my ways of honoring her.
Y cuando su madre murió, y leí el fin de semana su libro sobre el duelo, y bueno, podemos hablar de una vez un poco de eso, y leí también sobre este ejercicio de diseñar las camisetas un poco para distraerse, pero ahora veo que también un poco en honor a ellos, su padre que muere el año pasado, su madre que muere este año. Hubo muchos temas en esta lectura que me conmovieron, pero para mí es inevitable ligarlo con lo que nos pasa acá. Esta pandemia en mi territorio, que como ya lo digo, tiene muchas costumbres afro, se presentaron muchos asuntos que nos parecían extraños, inexplicables. La gente retiraba a sus muertos de los hospitales porque necesitaba hacer un ritual mortuorio, porque necesitaba velarlos a pesar del riesgo de contagiarse del virus. Y todo eso nos parecía absurdo, pero cuando leí su libro, mucho de esto me hizo sentido justamente cuando pude leer esa frase en la que usted se cita a sí misma y que dice, la pena era una celebración de amor. Quienes sentían auténtica pena habían tenido la suerte de amar. Entonces yo dije, bueno, todo esto que mi gente ha hecho, lo ha hecho porque amamos profundamente. Siento que todo lo del COVID nos ha generado una nueva relación con la muerte y nos ha traído una pena que es la pandemia misma. ¿Usted cree que quizá esto podrá develar esa suerte que tenemos de amar y ayudarnos un poco como a reconciliar este mundo tan lleno de odios?
I don't know, actually. I can talk about my own experience, which is that it's very difficult to lose the people you love and to have it happen during this period. When my father died in June, last June, yeah, I don't know actually. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Sometimes I'm okay talking about it and sometimes I'm not. But I think I'm learning that grief is about love. But at the same time, knowing that doesn't make it any easier. It's a very difficult thing to go through. I think what this pandemic has maybe done for us collectively in the world is that it has made us think about the things that really matter. You know, I think it has made us rethink what we value. I think it has brought some families closer together, and others have been split apart because maybe they shouldn't have been together. There's a sense in which this really makes you think about the fundamental core of what is important in life. Like what kind of life do you want to live? What do you love and what do you value? During when the lockdown first started, my family would do Zoom calls. So we were all scattered all over the world. My brother was in the UK, I was in the US. My parents were here in Nigeria. I had a brother here in Nigeria. So we would have Zoom calls. And those Zoom calls have become so precious to me because those were the last communications that I had with my parents were through Zoom because of the pandemic. And I think even the idea of a Zoom call, it changes the way you communicate. It makes contacts different, but somehow more precious. I don't know, it's very difficult to, I can't say that I believe that I don't think grief is a good thing. I don't know that we can get anything good from grief, but I know that we can think about ways of learning how to live, having experienced grief. I know that I'm a changed person forever. Both my parents dying, I have become a changed person forever. And I'm different about the way I approach things. In some ways, I don't have as much patience as I used to have because I think life is short. And I want to do the things I want to do because I don't know how much time I have.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias, Chimamanda, por hablarnos de esto tan íntimo, tan personal. La verdad es que este es un libro que lo recomiendo muchísimo porque siento que en este periodo todos de alguna manera hemos enfrentado esa pena, hemos enfrentado ese duelo y hay unas reflexiones que son muy desde el alma y que definitivamente nos van a tocar a todos. Bueno, vamos a hablar un poco ya de otras cosas también para casi ir cerrando. Ya me quedan pocas preguntas, yo quisiera hacerlas todas, pero el tiempo es limitado. Colombia no está por fuera de estas tendencias de la cultura de la cancelación y pues de un surgimiento de cierta ortodoxia que parece que se alimenta de algo que usted llama la aridez de empatía en las redes sociales, ¿sí? Aún así, es necesario apuntar ciertos temas que son importantes. ¿Cómo cree usted que podemos resolver ese dilema entre esa necesidad de apuntar, por ejemplo, los rasgos de racismo en la literatura o de misoginia en la literatura, sin caer en esa aridez que usted señala?
Okay, I should say that my criticism of social media is based on what I believe is a kind of people no longer have compassion, people no longer have kindness, but people talk a lot about kindness. But the kind of viciousness that goes on social media, the way that people are, you know, you make a slight mistake and people come at you, and it's as though you're not allowed to make mistakes. There can never be any redemption. People can be very harsh in their judgments. People forget that the people that they're talking about, the people that they're talking to in social media are human beings with feelings, human beings with fragile and delicate emotional and mental lives. And I think it's possible to have conversations about misogyny, about racism, about different kinds of injustice without being so lacking in compassion. It's possible to do. Part of the problem, I think, social media is that people are performing. It's like being out in the market square and you're trying to be the coolest kid. And often it means that you're more extreme than you would have been ordinarily. And you know, I think that I think people should just need to speak up more about how certain things are not okay. Young people today, I think, are terrified of asking questions. They think that they're expected already to know. And when they don't know, they don't want to ask, because if they ask, they can really be attacked on social media, and sometimes by their own friends. And I just think it's bad for society, because it means we cannot have a free exchange of ideas. It means that we're pretending and lying to ourselves. Because sometimes you sort of read what somebody has written on social media and you think, do you really believe it? Do you really believe that? You know, or are you writing that just to perform and just to play to a certain gallery? And, you know, I don't have patience for it anymore. And I should say that I'm not talking about legitimate criticism. I think that everyone, especially people who are public figures, you know, you will be criticized, and that's fine, because it comes with being a public figure. But I think it's about how you're criticized, and it's also about what is said. And so for me, for example, being told that there were people who were saying on social media that my parents had died, and that it was good for me and it was punishment for me, because according to them, I had not said exactly what they wanted me to say in the orthodoxy, that really upset me. And I thought, you know, this is it. Like, I mean, some things are just unacceptable. I think that there's some things that are sacred that you should not trivialize. That a person has lost her parents is not a subject that I think anybody at all should turn into, you know, should so belittle and trivialize. And so that really upset me.
Wow. Bien. Solo me quedan dos preguntas más y pues esta es, digamos, es imperdonable, no me dirían digamos, todos los que hablamos de feminismo, por supuesto, yo también soy feminista, no puedo dejar de hablar un poco de este tema, pero quiero hablar de algo en particular, y es la polémica reciente sobre feminismo y teoría queer. Especialmente sabemos que hay una discusión asociada a las leyes que se aprobaron en España. ¿Qué quisiera decirnos usted sobre esta discusión que en realidad parece dividir esfuerzos en torno a nuestras luchas femeninas y en particular al modo como somos representadas?
I feel like I don't have the time to talk about this subject that obviously is such a big deal now. But what I want to say is, it seems to me that there are places where classical feminism is in conflict with queer theory. There are places where there are conflicts. And I think it's important to have honest conversations about it. But I think that the orthodoxy of the left, the Western left, in the US and Western Europe, there's an orthodoxy, and that orthodoxy says fundamentally that because differences in people has been the reason that those people have been oppressed, if we want to take away the oppression, we have to pretend that there are no differences. And I think that's a very dishonest way of looking at it. And I think it's the fundamental, it's at the root of many of the clashes that are happening now. Because the truth is that there are differences between the goals of feminism and the goals of queer theory. And the places where they are in conflict, we need to talk about honestly. And I just don't think that that's happening. Because when people, especially women, when women bring it up, women are silenced, they're threatened with violence. I mean, there's just so much that happens when women try to talk about questions like that.
Muy bien. Finalmente, pues yo no podría dejar de hablar de mi labor como promotora de lectura, y es algo que también hemos visto en su literatura. Por ejemplo, en la carta sobre cómo educar en el feminismo, una de las recomendaciones es eso: enseña a tu hija a leer, ¿cierto? Que lea muchos libros como una forma efectivamente de educar en el feminismo. Pero también en Todos deberíamos ser feministas encontramos algunas historias sobre su taller en Lagos, sobre su taller de escritura en Lagos. Y esto a mí me parece fascinante en realidad, porque creo que buena parte del trabajo como escritor es animar a otros, enamorar a otros, conquistar a otros para que sean lectores también. ¿Qué representa este taller de escritura para usted?
Oh, that's so nice about your program. So when I started the workshop, I wanted to give writers what I did not have when I started out, which is a community of other writers and a way for them to get encouragement. Because writing can be quite difficult, and especially in a country like Nigeria, where you don't really have parents encouraging their children to be writers, because people just think you have to do something more practical so you can earn a living. You have to be a doctor or a lawyer or something. And so I wanted to start the workshop to encourage people who care about writing and to let them know that writing matters. You know, that this thing that they want to do, it's okay to want to do it. And also just to kind of tell them about my own writing life, my own journey. And maybe also, if possible, help them to get their work published, you know, introduce them to people or to show them how some of these things happen. I just really wanted to help to recreate a thriving literary community, not just in Nigeria, because we also have people come from other African countries, but I wanted it to be very Nigeria focused, you know, very unapologetically Nigerian, African. I wanted it to be about our stories. And in the workshop, I would encourage the students to write what you want to write. You know, there's nothing wrong with your story. Write it. And I also find that I learn a lot in my workshop. So it's very meaningful to me.
Bueno, ojalá algún día podamos también tener alguien nuestro en un taller con Chimamanda. Yo quiero agradecerle de verdad, quiero agradecerle mucho por este espacio, por esta conversación. Me siento muy honrada. Por supuesto, siempre estamos extendiendo nuestra invitación a que pueda estar también en el Chocó y conocer toda esta tierra que algunos dicen que es África en Colombia. Muchas, muchas gracias, Chimamanda, por haber estado con nosotros.
Chimamanda and Velia, thank you both. Chimamanda, it was great having you here with us and teaching us, telling us that all the stories matter and is a very big message important to Colombia and to the world. It always will be.
Thank you, that's very kind. Thank you. Velia, have I pronounced your name properly? Yes? I just want to say thank you. Your questions were so thoughtful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for you.
En la era de las noticias falsas, infórmate con una fuente veraz. Con solo suscribirte a nuestro canal en YouTube, recibirás actualización de nuevas noticias, cubrimientos en vivo y mucho más contenido. Somos El Tiempo en YouTube. Suscríbete ahora.